This is the Master Brewers Podcast, brought to you by the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, a volunteer organization dedicated to continually improving the products and processes of our membership since 1887.
Let's go!
Master Brewers brings you interviews with the industry's best and brightest in brewing science, technology, and operations.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from the Master Brewers Bookstore, where you can find must-have titles like the Practical Handbook for the Specialty Brewer, Beer Packaging, Conference Proceedings, and more. Visit mbaa.com/store to build your brewing library and make better beer.
You can create some of those nice malty flavors that are normally associated with barley malt, but you can find it in oats, which are gluten-free.
This week on the show, Jordon Geurts joins us from Briess Malt and Ingredients to give us a behind-the-scenes look at product development for malted naked oats, which can be used to enhance mouthfeel or to produce gluten-free beers. All right, Jordon, well, why don't you tell us what exactly are naked oats?
Naked oats are simply a version of oats that grow with a naturally loose hull. Simply just falls off during the harvesting process, so there's no special treatment to remove the hull, such as abrasion or anything like that might damage the kernel and alter its ability to germinate. So it's really nice for sprouting and malting because it doesn't have any lower germination capacity than the standard oats would have.
What are naked oats typically used for, and what made you think brewing might be a good application?
So they're typically used in the food industry. They're usually very high in protein, so they have and they have a high nutritional value. So they've been used in the food industry for quite a while now. We were working on them for food applications, and I was, had tasted some of the products we had made, and I was thinking that, if we made some changes, did some different kilning, we could make these a very nice product for brewing.
And they're typically malted in those other applications, usually, right?
They can be, actually they're primarily used raw, so they're not malted in all those applications for food.
Okay, cool. How would you describe the flavor profile of naked oats, and which types of malt are naked oats best suited for?
So we were kind of I was kind of looking at them for use in a gluten-free application. So they have a nice malty flavor when they're kilned. So you can actually create some of those Maillard reaction flavors, like you might find in a pale ale malt or a aromatic or a Munich style malt. So you can actually, as you push the kilning a little further, you can create some of those nice malty flavors that are normally associated with barley malt, but you can find it in oats, which are gluten-free.
Let's back up in the process a little bit. A hulless grain like naked oats is probably going to take up moisture very differently. What adjustments did you have to make to the steeping process?
We started with a full moisture study to see how fast they take up moisture and how readily they take up moisture. And being hulless and a very small kernel size, they take up water very rapidly. So we used short soak times and longer air rests during the steeping period, and that solves your workaround for not ending up with mush in your steep tank.
Okay, very good. Anything unique when it comes to germinating naked oats?
So they do take up water at a very rapid rate, and they'll absorb more water during germination as well. So you have to kind of monitor your water application. and they're also naturally hull-less, so there's nothing protecting the embryo. So turning over the grain during that process can actually damage the embryo and stop it from growing, which can create problems. You're not going to have a fully modified grain at the end if you damage the embryo. So you have to be careful and gentle with it during the germination process.
So are you able to turn it at all, or do you have to basically just not turn it?
You're able to turn it a little bit. You definitely have to turn it over to keep it from matting, because you still get ruvets and you still get acrospires during the process. So you have to turn it over somewhat so it doesn't mat, but you want to make sure that you're not turning it over excessively or more than you have to, because you will see some damage during the process.
Okay, tell us about kilning. You made a couple of different variations, I believe, a base malt and a dark malt.
Yeah, so I made we made 3 variations really. We made a standard base malt. We used a kilning profile similar to how you would kiln a standard brewer's malt. And then we also used higher curing temperature to create a more Munich style malt. And then we also did tried to create a caramel malt to see how far we could push the color and flavor.
How did the malt analysis look on all of those?
The malt analysis looked well. The very first batch I did used a standard 5-day germination was it was a very good 75% extract, 40 good bushel weight, and S over T was low, but that was kind of expected with the high levels of protein that you start with. But that 5-day malt had a serious off flavor, so we actually had to cut the length of germination back to about 3 days and use a little warmer temperatures to modify it a little more quickly, but ended up with a little lower extract and a little lower color in both our base malt and our Munich malt. But very good flavor in both, and still a decent malt analysis, a lower S over T, but still enough enzyme to convert a mash, which is what we're aiming for in a base malt. You need those enzymes to convert your mash, especially if you're going to be making a gluten-free beer. The oats are going to be your main source of enzymes.
So tell us a little bit more about the off flavor that you experienced in the first batch, and what you think caused that.
We basically, during the first batch, we use a standard 5-day germination like we would use for barley. You kind of know you go with what you know, and we knew that process would work for barley. Let's try it for oats. Well, there's a bacteria that grows on the outside of oats that produces this off flavor. The most pleasant way to describe it is dirt. Geosamin is another way that you might describe that flavor or that compound that's created. It's very earthy and just it's dirt, unpleasant.
Coming up, brewing trials with naked oats and more. I'm John Briess, and you're listening to the Master Brewers Podcast from the Master Brewers Association of the Americas. Here's what's coming up on the Master Brewers calendar. Don't miss the Draft Line Cleaning Best Practices webinar January 16th. District St. Louis meets January 18th at Anheuser-Busch InBev. District New England meets in New Hampshire January 19th and 20th. The 2018 District Ontario Technical Conference is January 24th through the 26th in Niagara Falls. The District St. Paul Minneapolis Scholarship Fundraiser is January 24th at Indeed Brewing. District Northern California holds its technical conference February 2nd at Sierra Nevada and Chico. The District St. Paul Minneapolis February Meeting and Scholarship Drive is February 8th at Surly Brewing. District St. Louis meets at O'Fallon Brewery on February 18th. The Fundamentals of Cut and Stack Labeling webinar is February 19th. District Mid-South meets at Mill Creek in Nashville March 2nd and 3rd. Districts Michigan and St. Louis both meet March 15th. And check out the speaker lineup for the 2018 Eastern Technical Conference, March 23rd and 24th in Atlantic City. View the full calendar of events at mbaa.com for more details or to find a district meeting near you. Now back to the show. So after you successfully malted Naked Oats, how did you set up, you did some brewing, how did you set up your brewing trials?
So for the brewing trials, I talked to my coworker, Dan Beese, who's done a fair amount of gluten-free brewing in the past. He's actually done an oat beer before, 100% oat beer. So he had some ideas. This time they had previously used enzymes rather than malted oats. So we were trying, to stay away from the enzymes, use all standard, brewing practices with no additional enzymes. And so we used, we did two batches basically. One would be 100% oats, and the other batch would be 50% oats. So for the 100% oats, we used the base malt that we created, and then the Vienna style malt at about 50-50. And for that, we did an extended mashing process because of the lower enzyme levels. But it turned out with a very nice, it yielded a very sweet, pleasant wort that was a nice color and didn't have too much of a haze. It was went well, and we then split that into two different yeast strains. And then for the 50% oat beer, we used just a Pilsen malt, and then 50% of our Munich style oats.
Now, I imagine milling is a little bit different with this product. Tell us about that. What's kind of the best practice for milling with Naked Oats?
Yeah, so milling the oats was actually more of a challenge than I thought it would be. It's one of the things that you just you have to do to everything, so you just assume you'll be able to do it. But with the small kernel size, you really have to tighten your mill, and you have to basically balance how much flour you're willing to live with versus how much whole kernel you're willing to live with, because there's a good variation in the finished kernel size. So you can't. Like I said, it's really a balance between how much flour you'll have and how much whole kernel you'll have, because you need to be able to access that starch, but you also don't want to create too much flour because it'll suffer during the lautering process.
Okay. Why don't you walk us through the beers that you made in a little more detail and talk about how they turned out?
So we can start with the 50% oat beers that we made, which, like I said,
you made two of those, right?
No, we actually made 5 of those.
Okay.
So it was the same wort split into 5 different containers and fermented using the 5 different yeast strains. We wanted to use something we wanted to highlight the contributions of the malted oats, but we also wanted to choose styles that would be appropriate to have a large non-barley adjunct portion. So we wanted something that would have, a little more clean and less estery profile. So we used just a standard American ale yeast and a cream ale yeast. And then we wanted something that was a little more appropriate to the high adjunct styles with we used 2 Hefeweizen yeasts and a wit yeast. And for all that, for all the beers, we wanted to kind of minimize the influence of the hops. So we used some more traditional style hops with low alpha contents, and just moderately hopped near the end. So you'd still have a little hop flavor, but you wouldn't cover up any of the malty oat flavor.
Okay, tell us about the sensory results from those beers. Any takeaways that were true across the spectrum of all the different yeasts that you used?
So for the 50% oat beers, they were fairly well received. They had definitely an increase in the mouthfeel. The oats gave a nice thick bodied beer. with good mouthfeel. There was a wide variety of comments to describe that, ranging from velvety all the way to slimy. But they overall had a positive impression of the beers.
All right, why don't you tell us some more about the 100%? So with that one, you also brewed a single wort stream and then split it up, but not into as many different fermenters, right?
Yeah, so we just split that into 2 beers. Just again, the standard American ale yeast, and then a Bavarian wheat yeast. We did a similar hopping profile, actually the exact same hopping profile, and then we did an extended mash profile for those beers because we wanted to make sure we could maximize the attenuation because of the lower extract than barley malt. For that process, our goal was really to make it taste like beer and have it preferably be drinkable.
And so, how about the sensory on those beers?
For the American ale yeast, it unfortunately was infected, so we didn't complete sensory on that beer. But the Bavarian wheat yeast was well received. It was true to style. Had a variety of estery flavors, had a nice color. Again, it did have the increased viscosity and mouthfeel. Overall, it was especially noted as good for gluten-free beer.
What were some of the biggest challenges brewing with naked oats, and where do you see naked oats being the most useful and practical in commercial brewing?
So some of the biggest challenges with the oats, their small kernel size, making it difficult not only in processing because standard being smaller than standard grain, it would fall through some of the screens that we had in place. So you would lose some during the actual malting process. You'd have to deal with compaction and damage to the embryo and some of those off flavors that can be created. But during the brewing process, you're dealing with low enzymes, no husk material for filtering aids, difficult milling, the high protein, and they're also high in beta glucans. So, there's a lot of challenges there for lautering that can potentially come up. We knowing this ahead of time, we really kind of babied our lautering process along and ran it very slow and took longer than it really had to, I think. But we wanted to make sure that we did it right and got a nice clear wort in the end. As for where I see oats being useful, it certainly in gluten-free beer having active enzymes, they could be used as a source of conversion enzymes. But more likely, I see them being used as an adjunct for flavors. So some of the the higher kiln Vienna style, or possibly even the caramel oats that had a nice caramely sweet flavor, I see as being more of a use for bigger brewing process.
Okay. Do you have any other trials planned or anything else you'd like to investigate with naked oats?
We do have more trials planned. We're working on creating a new product that could be marketed both to the gluten-free beer industry and all beer industry, as they would like to increase mouthfeel and viscosity of the wort, and also give some more unique flavors that the oats can actually bring to different styles of beers.
That was Jordon Geurts here on the Master Brewers podcast. If you like what you heard today, pick up a copy of the 2017 Master Brewers Conference Proceedings from the Master Brewers bookstore at mbaa.com. "130 years ago, Master Brewers was built on the concept of brewers helping each other out so we could all make the best possible beer. That's still true to this day, and it's where a lot of the camaraderie in this industry originated. Master Brewers' award-winning Ask the Brewmasters is the best place to go for troubleshooting, where you'll find the industry's only discussion forum that's moderated for technical accuracy by a team of experts. See what everyone else is talking about, at community.mbaa.com. United, we brew.
When we came around there, since there's like one thing that
Did you enjoy today's episode? Would you like us to keep making more? If so, there's a really simple way you can let us know. Subscribe, rate, and review the Master Brewers Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
full of courage.